At 90 years old, Hollywood legends usually write memoir. But Jane Fonda chose a different path. She finally decided to reveal why she quietly hated the woman America once worshipped for decades, Meg Ryan. While fans rewatch old romantic comedies and debate what went wrong with their idols' careers behind the industry's closed doors, the same two names have been whispered for years: Fonda and Ryan. They were never seen in public scandals, never exchanged insults in interviews, but everyone who attended private premieres and studio parties knew an invisible war has been raging between them. This video tells the story of how one role, one statement, and one wrong choice turned quiet dislike into personal pain. Why did an icon of political protest and serious cinema suddenly decide to speak about a star of light romantic comedies? What did Meg Ryan do that made Jane Fonda stay silent about it for almost 2 decades and speak up only now? If you think this is a story about jealousy, you're wrong. It's much darker and more painful. This is a tale about betraying the profession, fear of aging, and how one woman became a living reminder to another that in Hollywood, not everyone is forgiven. The Golden Queen, or the Lonely Dictator, who Jane Fonda really was. Her name sounds as if the word era is already woven into it, but what if, alongside grandeur, it also holds cruelty? Jane Fonda is not just an actress, but a living chronicle of a changing Hollywood, a woman whose life story breaks into several blazing lives, each of which could have become a separate film. Born into the family of screen icon Henry Fonda, she was destined from the very beginning to live under the glare of studio lights. Yet she realized very early that a famous surname is not enough to carve your own line into history. You have to challenge it. In the 1960s, Jane steps onto the stage not merely as a young actress, but as the embodiment of a restless America, protests, counterculture, political boldness. She rejects the role of the fragile blonde and chooses heroines who either break the old order or are crushed by it. And that is exactly where her power lies. The women she plays on screen are never convenient. They doubt, argue, suffer, confront men and institutions, and by doing so they provoke the viewer to see the world without the usual soft focus and comforting illusions. As the years pass, her career turns into an empire. 2 golden statues of the most coveted film award, landmark dramas, sharp political speeches, scandalous anti-war actions, arrests, black and white photographs with protest signs in her hands. All this merges into the image of an actress who refused to be only a face on a poster. The 1980s bring Jane an unexpected new crown, the Queen of Fitness. Her workout tapes sell in the millions, transforming her into a symbol of strength and discipline for a generation of women who, for the first time, allow themselves to say openly, "I want to be not only beautiful, but strong." But it is precisely during this period that whispers begin about another side of Fonda. Former colleagues drop strange hints in interviews. She's difficult to work with. She always knows how things should be. Jane doesn't tolerate objections. One producer once let slip in a private conversation: Fonda isn't just a queen, she's a judge, and if she decides you've betrayed her values, the verdict cannot be appealed. Is this truth or the envy of the less successful? No one gives a clear answer, but the rumors persist stubbornly behind the scenes. By the time she reaches her later years, Jane Fonda has long since stopped being just a performer. She is a symbol that a woman can grow older and not vanish, can argue with power and never apologize, can change genres, images, and political slogans, and still remain herself. She passes through marriages and divorces, career lulls, illness and comebacks, yet every time she appears on screen, it feels as if the sky above Hollywood splits open again under the flash of a searchlight. And that is precisely why her silence about Meg Ryan is so unsettling. When a person with such a story, such weight, and such a legacy says not a single word about a colleague the public adored, this is not humility. It is either strategy or hidden pain or something far more sinister. What makes a legend wait almost 2 decades before finally speaking the name of the woman she, as it now turns out, quietly hated? America's sweetheart, or a convenient illusion? Who Meg Ryan really was? This story will keep turning every bright smile into a quiet question. Because where the public saw America's sweetheart, someone in Hollywood insisted that behind that smile there was always calculation, and not everyone found it harmless. In the 1990s, her face became almost an official emblem of safe love on screen. Meg Ryan stepped into a frame with such ease it felt as if she were bringing warm light with her, and the audience believed as long as she laughed, the world on the other side of the screen would stay kind and predictable. Posters with her romantic comedies hung in bedrooms, videotapes wore thin from endless rewatching, and her slightly husky laugh felt like a national sedative. Yet the brighter her persona as the perfect girl next door shone, the more insistently a whisper spread that this persona was constructed a little too perfectly, a little too neatly, as if following a manual. Her career rose quickly, almost without room for missteps. One successful cameo, then another, and suddenly she was the central face of romantic stories where fate, city lights, and soft music always nudged the characters toward the right kiss. Film critics called her the queen of the genre, studio executives called her a safe bet, and audiences simply called her Meg, as if she were a friend you could complain to about a bad date. But beyond the lit-up posters, there was a strange dissonance. People seemed to know everything about her and nothing at all. No major scandals, no political statements, no loud manifestos, only films, smiles, and carefully maintained silence. And this is where the tension few dare to voice begins. In one private conversation, a director who had worked with Meg supposedly admitted she always knew exactly where the boundary of the persona lay, and she never crossed it, even when she should have. Some colleagues recalled that off-camera, she could be sharp, impatient with weaker partners, especially those who tried to weigh down the light genre and add unnecessary depth. But these recollections surfaced as fragments without names or proof, as if the witnesses themselves were afraid to destroy the myth they had helped to build. The public, however, saw only the outcome. Film after film in which Meg Ryan convinced millions that love was warm light in a window, a cup of coffee, and, if not a perfect, then at least a comforting, happy ending. Yet behind closed doors, a question was asked more and more often. Was this soothing fairy tale being crafted at too high a price? Some argued that Meg was simply doing her job honestly within the confines of the genre she was offered. Others whispered that her willingness to endlessly repeat the same type of role was not innocence, but a conscious refusal of difficult parts, conflict, and anything that might unsettle the audience, or certain powerful people in the industry. And here the central question, still without an answer, emerges. Did Jane Fonda see in this bright, doll-like career an act of betrayal, not of herself personally, but of the craft they supposedly shared? Эта история не дает им права быть просто соседками по индустрии. Слишком много в их биографиях оказалось завязано на одни и те же годы, одни и те же вечеринки и одни и те же роли, о которых официально якобы никогда не шла речь. The first meeting, a casual smile or a calculated move. Говорят, их впервые официально представили друг другу на одной из тех голливудских вечеринок, где шампанское льется рекой, а истинная ценность вечера измеряется не количеством выпитого, а количеством заключенных за ночь негласных союзов. В углу зала, под мягким светом софитов, стояла Джейн Фонда, легенда, к которой подходили почти так же, как подходят к алтарю, с уважением, легким благоговейным страхом и заранее приготовленными фразами. Чуть поодаль Мэг Райан, свежая звезда, вокруг которой кружились продюсеры, режиссеры и журналисты, ловившие каждый ее жест, словно от него мог зависеть их завтрашний заголовок. Момент их пересечения, если верить тем, кто был там в ту ночь, выглядел безупречно вежливым.
«Кто-то подвел Мэг к Джейн», произнес стандартное, но вам обязательно нужно познакомиться. И две женщины обменялись улыбками, рукопожатием, парой дежурных фраз о том, как они восхищаются работой друг друга. Фотограф успел поймать этот миг. Две актрисы, два поколения, два разных Голливуда в одном кадре. На снимке идеальная картинка примирения эпох, старшая королева и сияющая наследница.
Но те, кто видел эту сцену не через объектив камеры, а живьем, утверждали, в этой улыбке было что-то ненастоящее, слишком напряженное, как дрожь в натянутой струне. Одно из самых странных свидетельств принадлежит человеку, который тогда обслуживал этот вечер как персонал. Он вспоминал, что когда Мэг отошла, лицо Джейн будто бы на секунду полностью изменилось. Улыбка погасла, взгляд стал тяжелым и отстраненным. Это была не злость, скорее оценка, говорил он позже. Как будто она только что увидела не человека, а символ чего-то, что ей категорически не нравилось. Кто-то из гостей клянется, что слышал, как Фонда тихо бросила в сторону собеседнику: «Вот так теперь выглядит успех. Интересно, надолго ли?» Но эта фраза так и осталась на уровне полулегенды, потому что ни один микрофон ее не записал. Сторона Мэг, если судить по редким намекам, воспринимала эту встречу иначе. Для нее Джейн Фонда была фигурой почти мифологической, чем-то вроде живого монумента. И в таких монументов в Голливуде принято влюбленно смотреть снизу вверх. В одном из последующих интервью, не называя имен, Мэг однажды обмолвилась: «Иногда ты встречаешь людей, которых обожала на экране, а в жизни чувствуешь, что для них ты всего лишь очередное лицо на конвейере». Была ли это отсылка к той самой ночи? Или просто случайное совпадение? Ответа нет, есть только странный осадок, который остается между строками. Так, первая встреча, которая на фотографиях выглядит почти символом эстафеты между эпохами, в реальности оставляет больше вопросов, чем ответов. Было ли это столкновение характеров, различие мировоззрений или лишь игра воображения тех, кто любит искать тени в чужих улыбках? И если все тогда действительно было безобидно, то почему именно с этого вечера многие начинают хронологию их невидимого конфликта? The first meeting, a casual smile or a calculated move. This story refuses to let them be just two colleagues passing each other in the same industry. There are simply too many overlapping years, parties and roles that официально were never discussed between them. They were, according to those present, introduced at one of those Hollywood parties where champagne flows freely, but the true value of the night is measured not in glasses emptied, but in the number of unspoken alliances formed. In one corner of the room, under the soft glow of studio lights, stood Jane Fonda, a legend people approached almost the way they approach an altar, with respect, a hint of reverent fear, and carefully prepared lines. A little farther away was Meg Ryan, the fresh star around whom producers, directors, and reporters orbited, catching her every gesture as if tomorrow's headline depended on it. The moment they finally converged, if the witnesses are to be believed, was impeccably polite. Someone led Meg over to Jane with the classic phrase, "You two simply have to meet," and the women exchanged smiles, a handshake, and a couple of polite sentences about how much they admired each other's work. A photographer managed to capture it. 2 actresses, 2 generations, 2 different Hollywoods in one frame. In the picture, it looks like the perfect image of harmony between eras, the elder queen and the shining heiress. Yet those who saw this scene, not through a camera lens, but with their own eyes, insist there was something off in that smile, something strained, like a tremor in an over-tightened string. One of the strangest accounts belongs to a person who worked that night as part of the service staff. He later recalled that as soon as Meg walked away, Jane's face seemed to change completely. The smile disappeared and her expression turned heavy and distant. It wasn't anger, more like assessment, he said. As if she had just seen not a person, but a symbol of something she deeply disapproved of. Some guests swear they heard Fonda murmur to a companion, "So this is what success looks like now? Curious how long it lasts." But this phrase remains a half myth because no microphone ever caught it. Meg's side, judging from a few vague hints, read the meeting differently. For her, Jane Fonda was almost mythological, a living monument, and such monuments in Hollywood are meant to be admired from below. In one later interview, without naming names, Meg casually remarked, "Sometimes you meet the people you adored on screen, and in real life you realize you're just another face on their conveyor belt." Was she referring to that night? Or was it pure coincidence? Again, there is no answer, only a faint unease between the lines. So this first encounter, which in photographs looks like a symbolic passing of the torch between eras, in reality leaves more questions than answers. Was it a clash of temperaments, a collision of worldviews, or merely the projection of those who enjoy finding shadows in other people's smiles? And if everything truly was innocent back then, why do so many insiders start the timeline of their invisible conflict from that exact evening? A war of generations, the rebel versus the princess of a quiet Hollywood. This story is no longer just about 2 actresses. It is about 2 Hollywoods that pretended they could coexist peacefully until one of them started quietly pushing the other off the marquees and out of the spotlight. They seemed to step out of 2 different versions of the same cinematic dream. Jane Fonda was forged in an era when the screen was an extension of the street, protests, placards, anti-war marches, actors who did not just deliver lines, but challenged the system with every role they chose. Her generation believed cinema had to be dangerous, meddle in politics, tease power, wound the audience if that was the price of truth. Meg Ryan, in contrast, became the face of a time when the industry was exhausted by the shouting and blood of the 1980s and offered the public a new drug, gentle stories in which the world's problems shrank to misunderstood feelings in a big city and the question of whether the hero would arrive on time for the meeting. It was on this contrast that people in Hollywood began to whisper about a war of generations. For some, Meg was a breath of air. No heavy war monologues, no scandalous press conferences, just romance and slightly ironic lightness. For others, her phenomenon looked like a careful step backwards, back toward the very safe female images that Fonda and her peers had fought so fiercely to abandon. "We fought for a woman on screen to be allowed to be ugly, difficult, angry, political," one actress of Jane's generation once said. And then a new face arrived, and suddenly it was all about how beautifully you fall in love again. No name was spoken, yet many were strangely sure which face she meant. The tension grew year by year, even though no one officially declared any war between the camps. Awards budgets and marketing campaigns drifted more and more toward films in which women were assigned the role of emotional anchors rather than system breakers. In back rooms, bitter comments could be heard. If you can't smile sweetly and cry under the right song, they call you difficult now. Even when Meg Ryan simply signed on for yet another romantic lead, to the older generation it did not look like an innocent contract, but like one more brick in the wall separating the new, comfortable cinema from the old. Uncomfortable, but honest. In this invisible battle, Jane Fonda became the figure people's thoughts kept circling back to. Some insisted she looked at the Meg Ryan era with a kind of indulgence, believing it was just a fashion that would pass. Others maintained that beneath her composed exterior lay deep irritation, not at Meg herself, but at the signal her triumph sent. The industry had chosen to bury conflict beneath a blanket of sweetness. The truth, as always, dissolved somewhere in between. But one question only grew sharper with time. In this new queen of romantic stories, did Fonda see an innocent successor or a neat gravedigger of the cinema for which she had once risked her own name? The role that slipped away, coincidence, or someone's quiet decision? This story no longer fits into the frame of an abstract clash of eras. At some point, every conflict narrows down to a single role, a single script, and a single name on the line that reads, "Cast in the lead." Hollywood archives rarely preserve an honest trail of who was truly considered for a role before the world saw the final cast. But people who have lived inside the industry for years are sure of one thing. Almost every major actress has that one film that could have been hers but went to someone else. And it is around such stories that the stickiest, most dangerous silences form. In the case of Jane Fonda and Meg Ryan, the whisper keeps circling around one particular project, a drama about a woman caught between maturity and the terror of losing everything, between old wounds and the tempting safety of retreating into illusion. According to one version, the script first lay on the desk of people who had worked with Jane for years. A story about a woman with a turbulent political youth, now stranded in a strangely sterile present, sounded uncannily close to the themes Fonda had returned to again and again. The role demanded wrinkles, long, uncomfortable pauses, and monologues about what it means to grow old in a world that insists on pretending it is perpetually in spring. On paper, it looked like ideal territory for an actress of her magnitude, yet somewhere along the way between conversations and official offers, something quietly shifted. Another version insists that the studio wanted something softer, lighter, safer from the very beginning. Such things are never written down in meeting minutes, but many who have seen the system in motion claim that at some point someone uttered that familiar phrase, "We need a face people already love unconditionally," and the name Meg Ryan appeared in the room. The same Meg the public had learned to associate with stories where pain was carefully wrapped in polite humor and tragedy eventually surrendered to a comforting hope. Casting her meant a different reading of the role, fewer scars, more smiles, less dangerous truth, and more fragile, but ultimately soothing fantasy. Those close to the project later told different stories. Some insisted Jane had never been formally discussed, that the idea she was ever in the running is nothing but an elegant myth added later to heighten the drama. Others maintained that informal conversations had indeed taken place, and that someone at the last moment decided that the face of protest would weigh the film down too much, turning it from a marketable drama into a statement. And at that time, no one wanted statements. Where exactly that invisible line was drawn, at the level of a phone call never made or a surname quietly erased from a short list, remains unknown. What is known is this. When the film finally reached theaters, audiences saw Meg Ryan in that role. And it is here, according to those who enjoy building narratives out of coincidences, that the first real crack between the two women appears. Not a loud scandal, not a public quarrel, but a sense that one generation had quietly ceded its right to speak about pain and aging to another far more smiling one. Was this the result of backstage intrigue, studio calculation, or simply the market's cold choice? Or is it all just an elegant exaggeration born from the desire to pinpoint the exact origin of a hidden hatred? No contract and no official chronicle will answer that. Only a strange pattern remains. It is after this project, observers note, that Jane Fonda grows noticeably more restrained when talking about the new women's cinema, and Meg's name begins to vanish from the informal lists of those she mentions as heirs to the craft. Words you cannot rewind. When harmless comments start to sting, sometimes the loudest conflicts do not begin with a shout, but with a single careless sentence spoken in a bright studio under the gentle laughter of an audience, a sentence that sounds like a joke to one person and like erasure to another. Talk shows, press tours, red carpets at festivals. For viewers, all of this looks like an endless celebration where actors hand out smiles and light remarks like candy. But inside the industry, people know that these safe environments can be where the most painful things are said. In spaces where no one expects confrontation, people relax, and the truth slips out in the form of jokes, vague hints, or casually dropped comparisons. According to those who watch them most closely, the story of Meg Ryan and Jane Fonda also drew one of its invisible lines through such seemingly harmless moments. Promoting yet another romantic film, Meg once launched into a reflection on how female characters on screen were changing. She said that audiences were tired of overly heavy stories and now wanted to see women who are not carrying the whole world on their shoulders, but simply living, loving, making mistakes. In those words, one could hear an honest defense of her own screen persona, or a subtle jab at those who had spent decades turning every female role into a battlefield for meaning. At one point, she used a phrase that would later be quoted without context, that you do not have to be loud and political to matter. And for many, a very specific face immediately came to mind. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the media landscape, Jane Fonda was periodically asked about the new wave of actresses building careers on romantic stories and light genres. She responded cautiously, almost academically, emphasizing that every generation has its own tasks and its own audience. Yet sometimes, something slipped between her lines that made the temperature in the room shift ever so slightly. In one conversation, she remarked, "There are roles that warm the viewer and there are those that burn. I am more drawn to the latter, but of course, the industry currently needs the former more." No name was spoken, and yet many heard in this not just a comment on genres, but a polite distance from the kind of cinema that had become inseparable from Meg's image. Show staffers, magazine editors, and those whose jobs required them to watch dozens of such interviews back-to-back later, said that the unspoken addressees were where the real tension lay. No one accused anyone outright, no open contempt was expressed, only slight shifts in emphasis, slips of the tongue, and carefully measured pauses. To the general public, all of this blurred into the noise of the media environment, but to those accustomed to reading between the lines, a disturbing picture emerged. One actress claimed the world was tired of heaviness and wanted lightness. The other implied that without heaviness, cinema lost its honesty. Was this a real dialogue, carried on invisibly through cameras and microphones, or merely a projection of spectators desperate to find drama where none existed? There was no definitive answer. Yet each new comment, each slightly sharpened phrase, added another thin, almost imperceptible layer of tension to a relationship that both women preferred not to name out loud. Chapter 7. A face as surrender. Which of them feared the mirror more? When Meg Ryan first appeared in public with her new face, the world fell silent for a few seconds, and then erupted with that special, almost surgical cruelty that only audiences who have grown used to loving someone for specific features are capable of. Her lips became fuller, her cheekbones sharper, her entire face seemed to have been pulled towards some new standard of smoothness that had never belonged to Meg before. For some, this was a personal choice, an attempt to stay afloat in an industry where a woman's age is treated as a slow death sentence. For others, it was surrender to the very system that Jane Fonda's generation had once fought so fiercely against. It was at this moment, some observers insist, that the invisible crack between the two actresses moved from a professional dispute into something far more personal and painful. Jane Fonda had always spoken of aging as something to be embraced with dignity, almost as a political act. Do not hide, do not be ashamed, do not submit to the tyranny of eternal youth. Her wrinkles, her grey strands, her refusal of total cosmetic reinvention became part of her public image, a woman unafraid of time because she had something to say beyond beauty. In one interview, she once remarked in passing a line that was quoted for years afterward. When you try to stop time on your face, you are inadvertently admitting that aside from your face, you have nothing else to offer. Meg's name was not mentioned in that conversation. Yet when the quote was published, many noticed an odd coincidence. The interview had been given shortly after Meg's latest public appearance, where her altered face had once again become the main topic of conversation. Coincidence? Or the precise moment when Fonda decided, without naming names, to state her position as clearly as possible? There was no answer, only an awkward pause between the lines. On the other hand, Meg's defenders insisted that a woman's choice regarding her own body is sacred territory into which no one has the right to intrude with judgments and philosophical manifestos. One of her close friends once told a journalist, "It is easy to talk about the dignity of aging when you are already a legend and do not have to prove every single day that you are still worthy of being cast." Meg was fighting for survival, not ideals. This phrase, too, contained no names, yet many heard in it a direct response to Fonda, a response that was never spoken face to face. The most unsettling part of this story is that both women were right and both were hostages of the same cruel system. Fonda chose dignity and earned respect, but lost countless roles that went to younger faces. Meg chose intervention and lost the very face people had loved her for, becoming an object of mockery and pity. Who paid the higher price? Who was more afraid? The one who dared to change herself, or the one who refused, knowing full well what that refusal would cost? And most troubling of all, did Jane Fonda see in Meg Ryan's altered face just a cosmetic procedure, but living proof that the industry had finally broken the woman who who had once seemed to be its darling. What only the backstage sees, invisible scenes and witnesses who noticed too much. Sometimes the harshest confrontations happen not on camera and not in interviews, but in a backstage corridor where there are no microphones. Only witnesses who find it easier to stay silent than to name names publicly. Private premieres, intimate dinners after festivals, charity galas in luxury hotels. In photographs, all of this looks like one smooth, harmonious world where everyone congratulates, embraces, and smiles at one another. But step outside the flash zone and the atmosphere shifts. Here you can hear who avoids whose gaze, who laughs pointedly loud when a certain person walks by, and who suddenly becomes very absorbed in their phone screen just to avoid making eye contact. In these narrow corridors, according to those who have been there, the story of Jane Fonda and Meg Ryan looks far less abstract than it does on magazine covers. One festival worker recalled an occasion when they were seated in the same row, only a few chairs apart. In the official photos, the picture was flawless, both in elegant gowns, both politely applauding, both smiling at the host. But the observer from the audience remembered a different detail. They never once exchanged a direct glance, even though the distance between them was shorter than a red carpet. It did not look like absent-mindedness, but like carefully rehearsed inattention, he later said. Was this a conscious gesture or simply coincidence? No one bothered to check. But for those fluent in non-verbal language, such moments speak louder than any words. Another episode, still whispered about to this day, took place at a charity evening where both were announced as honorary guests. According to a staff member responsible for seating arrangements, at the last moment someone from the team insisted their tables be placed at opposite ends of the hall. The official version sounded innocent enough, so the stars could give attention to as many people as possible. The unofficial one was far less polished. It just seemed calmer that way. That evening, according to eyewitnesses, they never posed for a single photograph together, even though photographers were literally hunting for a shot of two generations in one frame. Who was avoiding whom? Who suggested they catch each other later? All of that remained off the record. All that remained was a strange void where an expected joint photo should have been. Insiders from the PR world also occasionally allowed themselves cautious hints. One of them mentioned that when planning major events, they were recommended, when possible, not to put both of them in the same program to avoid unnecessary interpretations. Formally, this could be explained by anything: scheduling, logistics, differences in target audience. But the very existence of such an unspoken rule looked troubling. After all, no open conflict between the actresses had ever been documented. No loud quarrels, no lawsuits, no mutual accusations. There was only the air, which seemed to grow slightly heavier every time their names appeared side by side on a guest list. The strangest thing about these stories is that each one, taken individually, can seem like coincidence, an absurd fluke, the ordinary logistics of big business. But the more such episodes pile up, the more urgently a question emerges. Is this just a series of convenient decisions dictated by circumstances, or a thin, almost invisible line of distance that both sides preferred not to mark with words? And if that line truly existed, who drew it first? And the one who felt betrayed by the profession, or the one who felt judged for trying to survive in a ruthless world where even a smile comes with a price? Silence as a statement, 2 decades without a single direct word. This story is constructed in such a way that at a certain point, the main event becomes precisely what did not happen. Not a meeting, not a quarrel, not a joint project, but an astonishing, persistent nothing stretched across years. On paper, everything looks almost respectable. There is not a single officially documented conflict, not one open exchange, not one interview where Jane Fonda and Meg Ryan directly spoke each other's name in a hostile context. Their biographies run parallel. One continues to appear in serious dramas and series, participates in political campaigns, receives Lifetime Achievement Awards. The other appears on screen less and less, becomes the subject of nostalgic articles, occasionally resurfaces in the news due to changes in her appearance, then vanishes again. If you look only at the facts, you might conclude there is simply no story between them. But it is precisely this absence that over time begins to sound like the loudest signal of all, of. Journalists have tried more than once to gently bring these two lines together. The questions were phrased politely, almost neutrally. How do you feel about the way female characters in cinema have changed over recent decades? Are there actresses from the younger generation whose careers particularly interest you? Or would you ever want to work alongside one of the icons of the romantic genre? In response, Jane Fonda spoke about trends, systemic problems, the importance of who writes the scripts and who makes studio decisions. She could list several names, mention colleagues she had already worked with or dreamed of sharing a frame with. Meg Ryan's name, by a curious coincidence, almost never came up, not as an example, not as a contrast, not as regret over an unrealized collaboration. From Meg's side, the picture looked no less guarded. In the rare interviews where she was asked about the older generation of actresses, she spoke of legends we grew up watching, of women who changed the rules of the game, and of those who will forever remain above the industry. Names of classic stars from the past were mentioned. Safe and universally acknowledged surnames surfaced. Jane Fonda appeared and disappeared from these lists as if her presence depended on the mood of the day or on how candid Meg felt in that particular moment. But not a single direct, living human comment about what she thought of Fonda as a person, as a colleague, as a possible scene partner ever emerged. Strangest of all is that over all this time, not a single credible story appeared about anyone attempting to bring them together professionally. No shared festival juries, no joint projects in the format of a bridge between generations, not even staged meetings on talk shows, which television loves so much. For an industry that usually monetizes any potential chemistry between big names instantly, such persistent unwillingness to even attempt it looks suspicious. Either everyone truly believed they had nothing to say to each other, or someone very carefully and consistently avoided any points of intersection. In the end, this silence began to be perceived as a particular, sophisticated form of statement. Not a boycott. That would have required at least one public declaration. Not reconciliation that usually requires a prior conflict. Rather, a cold, sustained distance in which each leaves the other outside their public universe. Was this protection from unwanted interpretations, fear of provoking scandal, reluctance to feed the fire of others' theories? Or on the contrary, a quiet but very deliberate, "I do not acknowledge you as part of my story"? There is not a single direct answer to this question. There are only the long years during which two women, forever inscribed in the same pantheon, stubbornly walk side by side as if, in the corridors of greater Hollywood, they do not notice each other at all. When the silence cracked, a confession that never became a verdict. At some point, even the most carefully maintained silence ceases to be protection. It turns into a weight that presses harder than any possible headline in the press. By the time Jane Fonda approached an age Hollywood once preferred not to mention aloud, her voice had long ceased to be merely the opinion of an actress. Every interview had become something between a confession and a lecture, people came to her for formulas of survival, for justification of their own choices, for the right to age without apology. So when, in one conversation ostensibly devoted to an entirely different topic, the industry's responsibility toward women, she suddenly allowed herself a personal tone. Many felt the air in the studio grow slightly denser. Not a single name was spoken directly, yet it was clear. She was not talking about an abstract type of actress, but about a specific story, too recognizable for those who had followed her career. She spoke about how painful it was to watch when a talented woman agrees to be reduced to a smile when an entire life full of possibilities is condensed into one safe image that can be conveniently sold for decades. At one point, her words cut especially sharp. Sometimes betrayal of the craft does not look like a loud scandal, but like quiet consent to play the same lie over and over simply because the audience loves it. In these words, one could hear many things: bitterness, disappointment, fear of seeing in someone else's fate a warning about one's own. Some in the audience might have thought of dozens of faceless stars of romantic comedies. But for those who had spent years piecing together the story of her invisible standoff with Meg Ryan, the subtext seemed too transparent to be coincidental. The journalist sitting across from her tried to clarify delicately, "Are you speaking about someone specific?" Fonda smiled almost imperceptibly, that same tired, slightly ironic smile of someone accustomed to having every word dissected under a microscope. "I am speaking about a choice," she replied. If you recognize someone in this whom you loved on screen, do not ask me. Ask yourself, why did you so easily accept her diminished? This was neither a blow nor forgiveness. Rather, it was a mirrored gesture. She refused to name names directly, but also did not look away from the shadow that had walked beside her own legacy for years. The strangest thing about this confession is that it never became the loud verdict those hungry for others' disasters were waiting for. Meg Ryan never responded to it, at least not aloud. There were no denials, no counter-jabs, no touching attempts at reconciliation. The media buzzed for a few days about Jane Fonda's hints, invented headlines, constructed timelines, but then the information stream carried the story onward. What remained was only the sense that somewhere, at a point invisible to cameras, one woman had finally spoken what she had refused to articulate for years. Spoken it, and then immediately hidden it behind conditional phrasing, as if she herself was frightened of turning personal disappointment into an official accusation. And it is precisely this half-fragile, half-restrained tone that makes the moment of confession more unsettling than any open scandal. Was this a belated attempt to warn those walking the same path as Meg? Or a final, almost involuntary notation that in her personal map of the world there exists a point where a colleague's name is forever tied to the word betrayal. Even if never spoken aloud, neither the interview nor the silence that followed provides an answer. But one thing becomes clear. From this point on, the story of these two women can no longer return to a state of nothing happened. Even if they never name names, the shadow of this not quite finished confession will accompany every mention of their names side by side. You kick a question no one dared to answer directly. Not envy, but betrayal of an idea. What Jane Fonda could not forgive Meg Ryan. This story holds its power precisely because it is almost impossible to point and say, here is where everything became simple. The deeper you look, the stronger the feeling that this is not really about two women at all, but about two ways of living the same profession. If this was simply a matter of banal envy, the story would have long ago been broken down into convenient, simple formulas. An aging actress resents the success of a younger one who takes her place, gets her roles, the press attention, the public's love, a classic pattern that sells beautifully and is just as easily forgotten. But in the case of Jane Fonda and Meg Ryan, something about that pattern does not add up. Fonda stepped out of the usual race for fame too early and too deliberately. She turned her career into a platform, her roles into statements, her age-related vulnerability into a weapon. To be jealous of a rom-com icon, if we follow the logic, would have been simply unprofitable for her. So it must have been something else. Over decades, Fonda had come to see the acting profession not only as a craft, but as an obligation. An obligation to be inconvenient, to ask questions the audience does not always want to hear, to prevent the industry from reducing a woman on screen to an ornament of the plot. When she looked at Meg Ryan's career, thoroughly built around comfortable, warm, safe stories, this could have been perceived not as a different path, but as a quiet retreat. Not just from herself, but from what had long become something like a vow for Fonda, to never again allow the system to cage a woman within the frame of a sweet, convenient, harmless heroine. In this sense, Meg, consciously or not, seemed to confirm the correctness of those with whom Jane had spent her life arguing. But the most painful part, it seems, was not that Meg chose a light genre, but that she stayed in it even when the system began to punish her for it. At the moment when rom-coms became outdated and audiences turned cruel toward her attempts to cling to youth through her face, Fonda might have felt, here it is, the outcome of a deal with an industry that first promises safety and then discards those who agreed to its terms. What looked like simply a different type of success in youth with age became a vivid illustration of where the refusal of depth ultimately leads. In that case, the dislike really does resemble disappointment more than rivalry, not in a competitor, but in a symbol, in a living example of how the profession you devoted your life to can destroy those who relied on it too heavily. At the same time, there is a mirrored side to this story that Jane may never have voiced aloud. In Meg Ryan, she might have seen not only a betrayal of the craft, but also her own potential weakness, the very thing she had so fiercely resisted. The fear of being reduced to a single image, the fear of becoming dependent on how the camera reads your face, the fear that at some point the industry will offer you a deal, stays sweet for us, and we will not turn you off. Contempt for someone else's choice under such circumstances easily becomes a way to shield oneself from the question, would I have held up if I had been in her place? But we will hear no confessions of this, only a carefully constructed position in which someone else's decision is definitively declared something one can never associate oneself with. And it is precisely this mixture of principle and hidden vulnerability, ideological disagreement and almost personal pain that makes the version of the real reason for her hatred so compelling. Not envy of another's success, but anger at the form of compromise she once forbade herself. The only question is whether this hatred was real, or whether it was invented by those who needed a simple word for a very complex set of feelings. No interview, no insider will answer this question. It remains suspended between them, like one more unspoken line in a dialogue that never took place. Two fates, two Hollywoods, an ending without reconciliation and without verdict. This story began as an almost personal drama, but by the finale it becomes clear it was never only about two women, but about how an entire industry chooses whom to preserve in memory and whom to hide behind nostalgic headlines. By the time the world grew accustomed to calling Jane Fonda a living legend, a presence in the industry no longer required proof. She stood on stages, received Lifetime Achievement Awards, appeared in series where her characters were allowed to be complex, angry, vulnerable, funny, all the things she had once fought for. In her later roles, there was much self-irony and much honesty. She could joke about aging, but she did not try to hide it. She was invited to speak about politics, climate, women's rights, and with each passing year, she reminded audiences more and more that an actress can be not only the face in the frame, but the voice of the times. In this Hollywood, where red carpets and stages are already crowded with words like legacy and historic significance, Fonda occupied a place that seemed unshakable. With Meg Ryan, everything was arranged differently. Her name appeared more and more often in articles with phrases like icon of the 90s, our beloved face of the past, the actress we miss. Films she starred in were rewatched in winter under blankets, returned to in moments when reality felt too heavy. But she herself was present in that reality less and less. Attempts to return to the screen were perceived by the public not as a natural continuation of her journey, but as an attempt to revive an image that audiences preferred to preserve in the amber of memory. Her altered face, instead of granting her the right to a second chapter, became for many a symbol that the fairy tale had collided too harshly with the necessity of survival. And so a strange picture formed. One woman aged in full view and became a symbol of resistance to time. The other seemed to dissolve into her own past, becoming part of collective nostalgia. In this divergence, it is easy to see a convenient moral. Here is the right path and here is the wrong one. But reality stubbornly refuses to fit into such a neat scheme. The system that Fonda fought so fiercely against still continued to demand eternal youth and emotional service from women. And the world that so tenderly remembered rom-coms with Meg was in no hurry to give her a new chance to be anything other than the ghost of America's sweetheart. And here the story twists itself into the most uncomfortable knot for moralists. One can endlessly say that Jane Fonda did not forgive Meg Ryan for choosing the easy path, perhaps for the plastic surgery, perhaps for the eternal convenience on screen. But the final scene, if imagined without cameras, would look far quieter. Two women, each of whom at different times was the face of an era, became for the world symbols of two Hollywoods, the rebellious and the comforting. One lived her path as if every frame were a political statement, the other as if every frame had to be a soft pillow for a weary viewer. Which of them turned out to be right is not for them to decide, but for those who watched the films years later. Therefore, the finale of this story does not resemble a verdict and does not aspire to reconciliation. There is no scene where they shake hands and no scene where one of them finally confesses her hatred aloud. There are only two careers that have become mirrors for the entire industry. In one reflection, the struggle for the right to be inconvenient. In the other, the attempt to survive by remaining convenient to the very end. And perhaps the main question that remains for the audience after this story is not why did Jane Fonda hate Meg Ryan, but rather why do we need so badly to believe that one woman must hate another in order to explain our own disappointment in a world that broke them both in its own way? The answer to this does not live in their biographies. It lives only in those who continue to retell this story.